Yeah. Close it, yeah. Thank you. Well, I really do want to thank all of you for coming. I quickly learned who my friends are when it comes to a poetry read. Not that many people will put up with it. 50 years ago today, in 1966, I was in Santiago, Chile, at the home of my muse and soon-to-be bride, María Isabel Cofre Aguirre, where we celebrated the September 18th national holiday of her country's Declaration of Independence from Spanish rule. For this reason, as some of you already know, I purposely chose this date for a reading from Maria's book and for my translation of Chilean poet Enrique Lihn's Figures of Speech. Before I read from the two books, I want to say how grateful I am to Pamela Booten and Mick White at Alamo Bay Press for publishing Maria's book. And likewise, I want to thank Malvern Books owner Joe Bratcher for having published through his host publications an imprint not only Figures of Speech, but other of my books, the translation and of collections of my own poetry, some of which are over there. I see Miguel Gonzalez Girth and Peter Valencia coming in. So, perhaps the three most popular poems in Maria's book, and most people think that the Maria poems are the best thing I've done, are Maria's tapestry that appears on the cover of the book. This is her cloth tapestry that she made. And the poem on a lamp that she had me make, and on her grandmother's sewing machine. While for me, the most ambitious poems are the longer ones entitled Maria's Voices and Maria's Yards. But because all of those poems were written in the 1970s or early 1980s, I have chosen instead to read a group of more recent poems that I am especially happy with for certain reasons that I will explain before I read each one. Hi, Miguel and Peter. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for being here.
Another poem that I will not read, which was written around 2000 or so, and which has received some positive feedback, is the one that concerns Bob Dylan, entitled Maria's Tambourine Man. The reason for exclusion in this case is that Joe Bratcher asked me not to read the Dylan poem again. Apparently because I had read it here more than once, and it is on his website in an ad for my Backtracking, the Host Publications book in which the poem was first printed. Finally, I want to mention that Maria appears in a number of the poems in my collection, Memories of Texas Towns and Cities, also published by Joe's imprint. In fact, Maria is in the Memories book in the very first line of the first poem on the town of Woodville, and in the last line of the last and book-length poem on the city of Austin, in which she figures prominently throughout. Just as Woodville begins, she is the alpha and omega of all the poems. Naturally, she appears at the heart of harbingers of books to come, A Texan's Literary Life, my memoir, published by Wings Press in San Antonio. And speaking of that fact leads me to the reading of the first Maria poem that I have selected, entitled Maria's Heart. Like a number of the Maria poems, this one concerns the sacrifice she made in leaving her native Chile for me and my hellish Texas.
Did you say hellish or hellish?
Hellish. What did you think I said?
Hellish.
Maria's heart, or whichever organ it is, hurts from what we miss. Bears the tiniest tear in the shape of where she was born to be, in her long, thin native culin. Given up against her will, once love had made her feel through affection's forceful sway, she had to forsake it and come away to this foreign place as any African slave, or more like the poor and oppressed, still brave immigrant hardship, as did the Irish and Russian Jews. For those of their own volition could choose to take the risk and make the voyage in a cramped, unhealthful steerage. If surviving to land on Ellis Island, the official arriving barely to understand the official exam would undergo. If answered wrong, stamped mentally slow, deported alone, separated from parents whose family name anglicized by authorities, and on Galveston Isle the same. Quarantined and lined up all in the nude for delousing by inspectors whose forebears earlier sued to enter the red man's space. Any indignity ready to endure, since each and every self so wonderfully sure in its innocent soul, or whatever it is, suffers pain for future bliss, it would soon find freedom's hope fulfilled. But with her longing for home unstilled, the rip from that rift now throbs again, its wound still seeping deep within. And all because her coming here cut her off from a relationship first and forever dear. Her maiden name replaced by mine, a Scottish on paperwork she has had to sign on her alien card, rude agents review with every trip, since she'll not surrender her Chilean citizenship. And how does it make me feel, her having come against her will? Oh, torn in two, though in the end know she stayed, and as yet no law has passed to send her back, and so have tried to believe it's right in the logic versus emotion title fight. The decision should go to the breakable heart, if that's the body's irrational, loving part. In 1976, we moved to Austin. 10 years after we had married by the law in 1966, for purposes of Maria being able to arrange for a visa prior to our church wedding at the end of January 1967, and our leaving immediately afterwards for Texas. 10 years later, in 1986, we bought our home in Cedar Park, where we have now lived for 30 years. Maria's Ideas is a poem about an addition to our house, and the final line contains the word genial, which has several meanings that all relate to this poem, but also to the primary subject of all the poems in Maria's book. our marriage and generation, her making possible growth and comfort, and her displaying or being marked by genius. I like this poem especially because of its last line, which is always the hardest to write. Ezra Pound said somewhere that anybody can write a poem, but only a real poet can end it. If not a real poet, I am still pleased with the ending of Maria's ideas. The final note, the poem is constructed in 3-line stanzas, with each line consisting of 6 words. This is a structure that I have employed in a number of the Maria poems, only varying the number of lines in a stanza and the number of words per line. Maria's ideas. At first, accepted few or none. Almost all rejected out of hand. An automatic would prefer my own. Argued hers were too much trouble. Would require money we didn't have. Though really just my giving in. For always it was utterly clear hers better and made more sense. Like the faithful used VW van she conceived we ought to buy. For its side door easily slides. 2 seats for kids and pets. With one removed for hauling sand, gravel, and her organic garden soil. To transport the tiles to replace the dusty, dirty carpets she felt so harmful to all our health. And having learned the hard way, marriage math means a little expense can make for a contented wife, I had paid the asking price. And then one day she thought we needed a bit more space, yet liked no house she saw, so decided to add to this, and had me call for estimates to expand out behind the back. The first seemed way too high, so had me phone another place. Eric arriving to hear her plan for an addition above the garage. And leaning against his pickup truck, he quickly sketched a simple design, a room for each of us, a half bath convenient to both, hers for tables and sewing machine, mine for shelves, CDs, and books. Into hers would move a bed on visits from family and friends. And although Eric's bid the same, his job finished right on time. And still, we're taking pleasure in this plot too saccharine for some. One true as a tragic plays, but hers with genial comic outcome. In the next poem, Maria's Hands, I will be interested to find if anyone catches the allusion to a Shakespeare sonnet in the first line. I'll be giving a test. In addition to liking the allusion, I enjoy the fact that the final line comes full circle from the opening lines with their religious reference. Of course, most poems aim to complete the circle, as Shakespeare's sonnets do so brilliantly. Maria's Hands. Her own are nothing like the ones in El Greco's ecclesiastical portrait of a cardinal in cape, red cap, and lace, rendered with thin, elongated fingers, beringed and extended on elegant folds, hers though short, not stubby at all, of a feminine form, yet softly strong. Her delicate nails with quarter moons, never changeable from full to a sliver, uncovered with polish or silver glitter. Whether peeling beets, carrots, or onions, washing pots, pans, lettuce, or toilet bowl, the same, whatever they handle or lift, pencils or pens, copybooks or spirits. On her right, the second digit is bent from getting caught in a bicycle chain, a permanent mark on its larger joint, her pinky bearing a sympathetic bend. Tender at times from her fibromyalgia. On the left, her simple wedding band, an unadorned gold from a Chilean store. Her best friend, no sparkling diamond. At another shop on the square of arms had the accepted name engraved inside, only once taken off as her protest sign, when found its mate removed from pain caused by a golf club swung with it home. At school, never took any typing lesson, yet her indices do as much as any two can. On any keyboard ever so accurate and quick, with gloves on has dug in the hardest dirt. In walking or sitting, feel deep comfort from holding them there, but if too sore from work, just to have them laid on will minister and heal. Nick and Pamela, thank you. I already acknowledged you, but you were not here.
Oh. We're very proud of it.
Maria's hymn, I must warn you, contains the lowest form of humor, a pun. And even worse, the last two words together form what might be called a double pun. But this punning came about so naturally that I couldn't help it and readily accepted it as meant to be. Maria's hymn. Before my barefoot Contessa will baste by hand and soul, she has me measure all around, from bottom of skirt to tabletop, where her seductive feet now slowly turn. To this pinning marks the proper length. As I kneel before this table, like the pedestal I have ever placed her on, though to her it's just pure sacrilege, can hear her say, they're made of clay, and yet love needles, until once more impiety sings her inch by inch another fitting hymn. Did anyone get the Shakespeare allusion earlier? Either you did? No. And Miguel didn't? Miguel, you let me down.
I warned you, I'm out of it.
I will be interested if anyone catches an allusion to it. Shakespeare sonnet, the first line. The first line is, hers are nothing like the ones. No? Shakespeare sonnet 130. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun's. Mine says hers are nothing like the ones. Too subtle. Failed again. This is a longer one. Maria's genealogy provides some background on Maria's early relatives on her mother's side. At the time that I wrote this poem, I did not know and only learned quite a few years later that among her mother's Aguirre relations There were two figures who appear in the great historical Chilean epic, La Araucana, written by Alonso de Ercilla in the latter part of the 16th century, after the poet had participated in the wars between the Spanish and the Araucanian Indians of Chile. La Araucana is, incidentally, one of only 3 books rescued from the famous book burning in chapter 6 of the first part of Cervantes' Don Quixote. Maria's genealogy. A lapsed Catholic herself, somewhat like her mother, who never went to Mass but ever offered a prayer, yet if unanswered right away, quickly appealed to another saint, though at least her younger daughter has attended on the 2 big dates, his winter birth and springtime death. Though instead of the Roman Church, has kidded perhaps she may convert to the polygamous latter-day faith. Smiles to remember in Chile how all along her pyramid street, neighbors would yell in warning, then close their shutters and doors at the coming of an identical white-shirted, necktie pair, though always one short, one tall, appearing each year to explain in broken Spanish the origins of their sacred Book of Mormon. Though saddened now to recall a young man murdered in Austin, who had served his time by walking each unfriendly, belligerent block to bring the news to every race, others sent farther for photographs of the records of married and deceased. In every out-of-the-way diocese, Ovalle, where on January 12th of 44, Gala was delivered of my pride and joy. Her second girl child, who prefers dusty La Chimba to anywhere else. Another unheard of country place, her grandfather's in the little north. Needed to know of his former life, ways her mother had had to go, which train she took to school in the southern town of Wrangell. Wanted as well to identify those her line descended from, and to find them had to drive to their family history center, to order from Salt Lake City handwritten archives on microfilm, to view in Texas the Chilean names, to decipher 5 centuries of entries for reconstructing her Aguirre tree, all the wedded cousins and their issue, the generations on her maternal side, down to her own and her sisters too, tracing back to 1540, when out of Peru, Francisco, most loyal captain to Valdivia, crossed with that conqueror, the Atacama, second worst desert in all the world. Born 1500 in Talavera de la Reina. He, her first relation in Chile, governor defender of La Serena, defeated Drake and his buccaneers, had marauded her native coast, burning homes and inventories accurately kept for every parish, her forebears born and buried. Paco, later mayor of Santiago, capital city where she came to accept, for this gave up her storied nation. Here where she's read how at 69 he lay in prison in La Plata, awaiting 3 years for delayed release by order of the king, would hear and respond to news they had dragged his faithful servant before the Inquisition in Chuquisaca, marched in chains from Tucumán back across the Andes and the Atacama, to be accused of heresy in word and deed, 90 crimes against religion. Among them, how not hearing Mass could bring no harm to those he believed commend in hearts their souls to God. How Plato could equal in thought the gospel according to the Evangel John. How excommunication frightened little men, not him who never feared dishonest priests. Would eat not fish but meat on Fridays. On holidays had his Indians work the fields. Declared heaven and earth could pass away, but not the truth he was pledged to say. Then bareheaded, forced to confess his errors, his bishop and viceroy had grown to covet the authority invested in him by Philip II. Those at last had convinced the throne the Americas needed to sit a tribunal, whose accusations continued till 76, when he returned to his fruits and flowers, orchards and gardens won, and Araucanian wars. At 81, after 40 years, and just before the end, writing from New Spain, his final lines, declared he had faithfully served his sovereign, along with chapel, household, and offspring, spending 300,000 of his personal pesos, losing brothers, sons, son-in-law, and grandsons, in discovering, subduing, and settling a kingdom, in the name of his highness, whose hands and feet his vassal kissed from the blue Pacific. Of her long, thin land she now revisits by virtue of that conquistador's words. And those who trust in the power of prayer to save them from eternal death, and every ancestor who ever lived before that sacred revelation of their founder, Joseph Smith. Okay, this is an exception. I'm reading one poem from the 70s, or maybe in the early 80s, I don't remember. Maria's Bath is far from being an erotic poem, but it is the closest thing to such of any of my poems in Maria's book. It is in two parts, both of which I have liked for their description, especially the image of a rusting apple, as well as for the paradoxical phrase, the dead bolt shot to life. Maria's Bath locked herself in there and left us all panting here outside this door. Let kids, pets, and hubby know in no uncertain terms was not to be disturbed. With her beyond our sight and touch, or feeling low and utterly lost, stand or pace about and listen hard for sounds of water run or pour, for the dead bolt shot to life. Hear it and sniff her aroma emerge, renewed by loofah after all her chores, soaked and sponged with lavender soap, rinsed off and now more lovely and soft, rubbing her again all wine and pearl. Between the caulk applied and smoothed more than once from its smelly tubes, with their guarantee the job would last, and plastic tiles had touched up twice, first with a yellow paint she simply hates, and then with something called Rust-Oleum, whose label claimed it would stop the ugly stains or money back, but have started again. At the edge of the unsightly mildewed tub, where half submerged, she stretched herself, with her brown eyes fully closed upon her modest pair of lily pads. This rent house room now misses so, having to fall back on its glaring fixtures, its garish color none she would ever have. The one the landlord said to leave alone told her rudely, just let it be. And this recalls such dreams of her coming here with her book to read, with her apple pared to eat, to add more water, hot or cold, with her little wondrous toes. And yet, on revisiting the scene, it only reveals on the bathtub rim her Chilean author's wet memoir, her bitten core rusting with all the rest of it. No other sign, not another left behind. Even the ring washed down the drain, and with the mirror now unfogged, stared vacantly at a scrawny Texan neck, instead of catching the hoped-for glimpse, just the reflection of all her loveliness, set against this dingy enamel. Yet just to know she bathed in here, puts such shabbiness head and shoulders above the most luxurious sunken frame, and turns this cheap paint job into a pure primeval pond, viewed as through a clearing in creation's mist, regains this room's lost innocence, dresses it in the freshest fruit and shade, recovered it as if by the pages she turned, with soft, warm, ungrasping fingers, the watermarked promise of a garden plot, never to end, nor ever change. I think I'm going on too long. What time do you have, Greg?
4:37.
Yeah, I'm going on too long. I had others I would read, but that's obviously plenty. So now I want to read from the Enrique Lihn translations. Before doing so, I want to mention that after publishing the Lihn collection, Joe Bratcher also published After Dinner Declarations, my translation of a book by Chilean poet Nicanor Padre, so here, which won the Texas Institute of Letters Book Translation Award in 2011. However, Lihn's poetry had preoccupied me as a translator for more than 30 years before I translated Padre between 2007 and 2009. Having long admired Lihn's poetry, I was delighted when Joe Bratcher decided to do a second edition of Figures of Speech. I will begin with an excerpt from Lihn's book-length poem, Written in Cuba, Escrito en Cuba, which I had not included in the first bilingual edition of Figures of Speech, only because I had lost the Spanish version of the text, which I later received as a gift from my friend Bill Fisher. This poem is typical of both Lihn and Padre's anti-poetry. Although the two poets' anti-poetry is stylistically different, it shares the simultaneous rejection of certain aspects of poetry and a belief in the social and personal benefits of the genre. Although Lihn finds fault with poetry and with himself as a poet, he asserts in any number of poems his need to practice the art, as in his sonnet entitled, What Would I Be Without My Words? This is an excerpt from Written in Cuba. So I see myself in this fragmented world a beggar, scratching in the garbage heap of words, in the trash of things, with this sack of the soul on my back, this monstrous sore that has grown at my expense, this hump, these stumps of wings wrapped in filthy rags soaked with gangrene that shut off my access to the real, that close me off from the violent world. I have not hung up the habits of poetry, but I know them only too well. They carry nowhere. For that reason, I will drag them far from this firing squad. And I make no joke of what I do. What I do is a joke of what I do. Verses, mending verbal patches, sewing of words, and little piles of whatever I run into in the sand as I wander with my nail-tipped cane for stitching it all. These remains that are not denied me, over which I exercise complete control, boundless and sterile. Nobody's land, I am one of your sons, neither the poet of yesterday nor the future poet, nor even of those who are permitted the luxury of escaping to the, quote, intolerable human condition with the help of magic. It doesn't seem to me that in some anything has changed just because a difference exists between the alchemy of the word and French cooking, exquisite products of an outworn culture. The time has also passed for those who prefer to agonize in the most distant corners of the earth. Quote, and others, race of extremity, spiritual limit of the dead hour, we live in negation, discontent, and grief. I believe even less in some of those who afterwards came among us proclaiming the period of armed poetry. They are there, rocking themselves on a pleasure yacht at a safe remove from the shore, rocking themselves on that celebrated wave of dreams, which the surf has converted to a far-off bubbling as if the sea spat with its trumpets. If the mountains of Jericho had depended on those angels, not even a single bullet would have opened in them a modest hole. It is well noted that it is only possible to knock them down with cannon shots. At times a snatch of chamber music reaches here, or they uncorked champagne bottles, laugh and dance. Who would have thought? And the celebrated wave does its thing, breaks. Who is going to believe anymore that dreams can liberate? Now this is a short poem. It's called Of Man and Granite. It was written in Spain about the region of Galicia. It too, like another poem that I was going to read, involves a contrast between the past and present that shows another of the many sides to the Chileans' observant art. The other poem was called The Hudson on the Way to Poughkeepsie, and he talks about Walt Whitman and what has happened to our rivers that Whitman had praised, but they're now, of course, polluted. Of Man and Granite, villages of farmers pampered by the earth and granite, and they still select for their sturdy homes and even for the post of their vineyards. I think I said and, I said that they choose. People of a dark tongue that remains so to them, who, if they have 100 words for following the pine's mutations and for intoning the timeless conjunctions of earth and man, of man and granite, have none for naming since the Renaissance the transformations in the world of the modern, the inventory of those things that are, with time, the only ones to change. This next poem is entitled Laughter Abounds in the Mouths of Youths. And it's a poem that reminds me of Chaucer's The Pardoner's Tale, with its allegory of death. Lihn's poem takes place in Canada and updates the medieval theme for our modern times. Laughter abounds in the mouths of youths who watch a poor woman who passes regularly down Yonge Street without seeing her beneath her hood and dying of laughter, nor notice how the victim of their laughing follows them, no more noisily, it's certain, than the flakes of snow. They enter and leave the mode's crystal palace, of which the beggars have passively taken possession, like putting on a glass trench coat against Toronto's frozen sun. Nightfall awaits them as a backdrop at the hour for showing off their leather jackets in a brothel farther on. In the rear, striptease, and up front, a deck of marked cards, and someone who isn't seen, doubling the bets on one side, and on the other, hilarious only by her not being there. Those dying of laughter fight it out with knives and run out like vomit to the snow on Yonge Street, where she, the last to laugh, with a winning ace in her hand, approaches as a good Samaritan the foolish youth in the throes of death and lifts her hood to peer into his eyes with her eyes of snow. Brilliant, huh? So I'm going to end now with the longest poem of the evening. This is entitled For Regus Capatos. This piece develops an analogy between a poet, Regus Capatos, a Greek poet, a friend of Lihn's, analogy between a poet and a cat. And to me, it is quite charming and insightful. It demonstrates Lihn's knowledge of world literature, as the poem about the Hudson River did. In this case, you'll see allusions to Plato, Coleridge, and Shakespeare's Hamlet. And it also demonstrates his ability to incorporate such works into his own original poem or book. Before reading the poem, here is a drawing by Lihn of the subject of his poem. This is the poems of Antinous and other cats. Los poemas de Antinous y otros gatos. And this is a drawing that Lihn did of Antinous. For Regus Capatos, in memory of his cat, Antinous, this poem written when the little animal was still alive. Friend Antinous, old and 12 years of age, lives nervously, frugally, not on the street and not to be. Regus imitates the animal, and up to a certain point, he imitates him in the Greek sense of the word, imitation. There are moments when they seem to converge, and the poet secludes himself in his house as if in a ship, for grooming the words, just as Antinous does his coat and whiskers. Neither of the two is distracted then from the task of that silent pulchritude. The world withdraws from around them, and man and cat sailing together with tongue and language, offering a negative definition, the one of words, the other of licking. The presence of an invisible speaker in the outspread body of the poem, and the stretching out of Athinulis, who finds in himself under his tongue another cat, but molded of his own flesh and bones, shaped above all in his skin. For the cat that ages at the same time in repose and in nervousness, the rest is the practice of the signs that remind Regus of the captain's duties and rights. His extended layovers in the unknown port of New York reproach him for Athinulis, the same nothing that plays with him in the empty hours when nothing is the cat and the cat the rat. The absolute solipsism of this old fellow causes him without a doubt to confuse Manhattan with an inaccessible catness, rival of his own. A macroscopic cat would await Regus at the street door if those last three words had any meaning, and not the labors and days of Kapatos, who during this time makes a supreme effort to install the Feast of Aesop, his second restaurant near Columbia University, overwhelmed by bureaucrats. Athinulis can make no connection between that feast and the one, despite so many absences, offered him punctually in the form of cat food. His appetite, if he has one, is eclipsed at the sight of the familiar hand beneath which he arches his back, and in return places his paw on the chest of the seated man, in a certain sense, his property. Thank you.